Okay, let's dive right in. Daniel 2 revealed 5 major kingdoms from Daniel's day to the end. I didn't put that in the quiz, but I think all of us, hopefully by now, remember all of those kingdoms. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Have you ever had a two-faced friend? Yeah, a friend who is nice to you in front of you and then says bad things about you when your back is turned, right? Yes, I think most of us have had somebody like that, and it isn't pleasant, right? Well, there is a power on earth that has pretended to be God's friend, but is, in fact, God's enemy. And so understanding this power and understanding where it fits in prophecy is an important part of surviving the end-time deception that Satan has planned and that God has already revealed in his word. Daniel 7 is going to give us clues as to their identity, not just clues, but we're going to be able to then figure out exactly who this hidden enemy is. Now, Daniel 7 verses, we'll read the first part of Daniel 7. This is a dream, a vision that Daniel had. He says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed. And then he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. And I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind also was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And after this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth, and it devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And then comes the judgment of God in Daniel. Daniel verse 9 of Daniel 7 says, I kept looking until the thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was like white snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames, and its wheels were a burning fire. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court sat, and the books were opened. So then the 5th kingdom is established. So each of these beasts is a kingdom. This is essentially a repeat of the same kingdoms that we saw in Daniel chapter 2. Okay, so then that first in Daniel chapter 2, the first metal, the head of gold, was what kingdom? It was Babylon. Then the arms of silver were Medo-Persia, right? Then the thighs of bronze was Greece. Then the legs and feet of iron and iron mixed with clay was Rome. Yes, and so then the 5th kingdom was the kingdom of Christ, the kingdom of God. Yes. So as we keep reading, we see this part, right? But here in this now, we're getting more detail than we had in Daniel chapter 2. God's giving more clues, more information so that we can identify especially this last beast, which is very much of importance for us who live in the last days. We continue. It says, and as for me, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. And I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all of this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. And he says, these great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all ages to come. So 4 great beasts, right? 4 kings. And you'll remember when we talk about kings, we're talking kings rule kingdoms. And so kings and kingdoms are interchangeable. So 4 kingdoms will arise on the earth. Now, I'll just give you a little quiz here. Is this every kingdom that was ever going to exist on earth? No. It's only specifically relating to the kingdoms that affect the people of God to the end of time. All right? So the Chinese, for instance, aren't included in this, not because the Chinese weren't a civilization or a large civilization, but because they don't factor in specifically in persecuting or fighting or attacking the people of God for the end of time. And so that's why, for instance, we see these particular kingdoms that go from the time of Daniel to our present time. Daniel's especially interested in knowing about the fourth beast, because the fourth beast is the scary one, right? Then I desired to know the exact meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, right? So that's really scary, right? Exceedingly dreadful. With its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth uttering great boasts, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one, and the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. And so here again, we see that progression, right? Kingdom 1, Kingdom 2, Kingdom 3, Kingdom 4, leading to Kingdom 5, and that is going to be when all of evil will come to an end, and human history will be, essentially sinful human history will come to an end. All right? So the angel then is going to give the interpretation. And just before I get to the interpretation here, I will say this one thing that I don't have in my slides, but I think it's kind of an interesting point. The third beast is which kingdom? Greece. And Greece is the only one out of those 4 kingdoms given dominion. And when you talk about dominion, you're talking really about influence on culture and history. If you think about the Greeks, they've had a profound influence on our, especially the Western thinking, on philosophy and in science and in religion. They've had a tremendous impact in how we think of these things. And so understanding that dominion was given to them does help us to know some of the errors that then when Rome comes along, Rome takes a lot of the mythology of Greece and just incorporates it into their religion and into their empire. And that's where we have, to this day, just a huge amount of influence from the Greek mindset. We're going to get into that when we get into some later presentations, but I just thought it interesting. It's also maybe more than coincidence that that when we read here about the iron, it has it says teeth of iron in verse 19, and it's claws of bronze which are devoured and crushed and trampled down. So it's like the claws of bronze kind of give it. And by the way, apparently I got the reference on the top wrong because it's Daniel 7, 19 to 22, for those of you who are writing down your verses. All right? So the angel gives, there's like 100 slides in here, and I'm working through multiple ones, so you'll have to forgive the occasional error. The angel gives the interpretation here, so we continue in verse 23. It says, Thus he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth, and tread it down, and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones, and will subdue 3 kings. Right? So the 10 horns are what? According to this, verse 24, 10 horns are what? 10 kingdoms, right? 10 kings, 10 kingdoms, right? And then what happens is there's this one that comes up and is different. It says he'll be different than the previous ones and will subdue 3 kings, right? And he, meaning the little horn, will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in laws, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half a time. But the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. So the good news is, even though this king is going to come in and he's going to cause problems for the saints, It's not going to be forever, right? But there's going to be a time where it's going to come to an end. And then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and the dominions will serve, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. Right? And so again, we see that at the end, Jesus Christ is the King of kings and Lord of lords, and all of the dominions, all of the kingdom, all of the ruling, or the authority, if you will, will be given to Jesus Christ, and that kingdom will last forever. Right? And at this point, the revelation ended. And as for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming me, and my face grew pale, but I kept the matter to myself. Right? So there are 4 major earthly kingdoms. We'll go over them one more time. So by this time, you guys will be experts at this, right? Because we go over it so much. It's like we'll feel a little bit like you're in school, right? So number 1, we're talking the first kingdom is Babylon, head of gold, right? Number 2, by the way, what is the beast version? It's the lion with the wings, right? So the lion is a very famous symbol actually in Babylon, but it also represents strength, right, and majesty, and then the wings on it represent swiftness or speed, right? And so that's the one. And then Medo-Persia, the arms of silver in Daniel 2, they defeated Babylon and took over, right? And that is the bear with the 3 ribs in its mouth. Commentators differ as to what the 3 ribs indicate, but some believe that it's some of the kingdoms that they had conquered. The fact that it's on one side suggests that one side is stronger than the other, and we know this, that Media was actually the larger kingdom and Persia was the smaller one, but that Cyrus was able to basically flip it around so that the Persians actually gained the supremacy, and so there was a little bit of an imbalance, and that's why you see the bear on the one side. And then you have the Greece with the thighs of bronze, around 331 BC, that Alexander the Great defeated Persia and took over. And then we have Greece, and that's an approximation on the date. Legs of iron and feet and pottery of iron. Rome is this exceedingly great beast, right? So then I want to spend most of our time here on this little horn, because it's the little horn that is especially relevant for us here at the end of time. All right, so this little horn represents a kingdom, right? Because horns represent kingdoms. Daniel 7:24 again, right? The 10 horns out of this kingdom, 10 kings will arise, and another one will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones and will subdue 3 kings. So we know already we're looking for a king, right? A kingdom. Then the little horn, and so it will uproot 3 kingdoms, right? And it has the face of a man, unlike previous beasts. Right? So it has this face of a man on the horn. And so that has significance. In Daniel 2, we saw that the feet had a mix of clay and iron. You remember that? How it's like it's iron and then the feet are clay and iron. And so then, but it's still all the same kingdom because it's still got iron. So something seems to continue and yet something changes in that continuity. So the idea being that for most of it, it seems to go one way as being a political power. Well, what does this mean? Right? Again, I have this listed in Daniel 2:42 and 43. Toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery. So some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay. They will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another. Right. Even as iron, I don't know what that was about, don't worry. Even as iron does not combine with pottery, and that's kind of, it just stops there, but this whole thing, right, is that it's got iron and clay, iron and pottery in this version here. And then Daniel 7, we see that the first was like a lion and had wings of an eagle. And I kept looking, and the wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand up 2 feet like a man, and a human mind also was given to it. And so here we see this man aspect of it. We see the clay aspect to it. And really they're referring both to a very similar thing. And I'll just give you one more reference. Isaiah 64, verse 8. It says, "But now, O Lord, you are our Father, we are the clay, and you are potter, and all of us are the work of your hands." So when clay is mentioned in the Bible, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, it's in reference to clay and creator, clay and God. We are clay, God is creator. God is the potter, we are the clay. So when you look at it, you look at that first beast is representing Babylon. What happened in Babylon? We read it in chapter 4 of Daniel. What happened to Nebuchadnezzar? Did he remain a pagan? No, according to Daniel 4, he actually converted and became a believer in the Most High God, right? And so he went from being an evil king, an evil force, to being a force for good. And that is represented when we see Daniel chapter 7 and verse 4, where he's made to stand on 2 feet like a man. He went from the beasts are evil, but then he became good. And so this man aspect suggests a spiritual or religious aspect to it, right? There's a religious aspect to it. And then we talk about the clay and the iron. Well, the iron represents political power. The clay represents religion or spirituality of some kind. And so we're looking, this gives us clues. So these symbols are pointing to a political, religious power. So there's some form of duality that is going into this power. And so then when the little Bible mentions clay, as I already said, it mentions the potter, and I said that too. Human face is a political power that speaks reassuring things, a religious power, I should say, that speaks reassuring things of a political nature. Religious power. So it appears after the 10 horns, and so that's also going to tell us history, because we're trying to also follow the clues, right? Where is it in history? So we know that it has to come after Greece, and it comes after Rome, because Rome's already established. Then you have the 10 kingdoms. So it's coming in that progression. It's going to come from the Roman Empire, because it can't be something new. So you know that it's going to be connected to Rome, right? And it's uprooting 3 kingdoms. So we're looking for Rome going and breaking into 10 parts, and then out of those 10 parts, 3 parts are going to then be uprooted by this little horn power. And history confirms that 3 of the kingdoms belong to the Arian branch of Christianity, and Arians believe that Jesus was a created being and not God. And those Arian kingdoms were the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, and the Visigoths. Now, I could tell you who conquered them yet, but I'm going to leave you in suspense a little bit longer. All right? And so Daniel 7:25, it says, "He will speak out against the Most High and will wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hands for a time, times, and half a time." Right? So we've got a period of time. So what are we looking for? Well, he's speaking out against the Most High. So this is the little horn power speaks words against the Most High God, and he is going to wear out the saints. He's going to go after the saints, and he will look to set the times and laws. And so when we're talking, he's going to look to change the commands of God. He's looking to change the times of God. When people are worshiping and how people worship are the ways that you're going to start looking when you're looking for this beast. And he will persecute the saints for a time, times, and half a time. And so there's special meaning to that particular verse. So the little horn attacks God, right? The first attack is a verbal one. And secondly, it looks to replace God on the level of history, right? So it's looking to take the place of God. It's looking to change the times that are set by God. So then the saints belong, of course, to the 5th kingdom, but they are persecuted by this little horn power. So we're looking for the little horn that is persecuting the saints. It's going after the saints. And they are persecuted for a set period of time. And that time is time, times, and half a time. So when we're talking about prophecy has, as you can understand, is symbols, right? We've been doing all through this. We're looking at different symbols. So when it comes to a day and a year in prophecy, they mean differently than what they do for us. So there's a prophetic principle we find in Ezekiel chapter 4. God had given to Ezekiel a task to show. You remember how I talked about how crazy Ezekiel was of breaking out of the side of his house instead of the front door? Well, one of his tasks was he had to lay on his side for like 40 days. And then at one point he had to lay on his side for like 240 days and something like that. Well, the 40 days here in Ezekiel 4:6 is mentioned in the latter half of that verse. He says, I've assigned to you 40 days, a day for each year. So the principle here in prophecy is a day means a year. And so then this period, what is this times and a half, right? Well, Revelation gives us a clue about what times, and half a times mean. In Revelation chapter 12 and verse 14, it says, but the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place where she was nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent, right? And then just a little bit earlier in chapter 12, we see this. The woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God so that she would be nourished for 1,260 days. And so we understand that times, and half a time equals 1,260 days. But now with a year, every day meaning a year, then what are we looking for? We're looking for a period of 1,260 years, right? So one day equals a year principle, we get 1,600, 260 years. And this little horn is the same as the first beast of Revelation 13. Now, in the process of putting this presentation together and trying to keep it in a bite-sized measurable part, I don't go into all the details as to why that year-day principle is. I do have those details in my book, The Last Crisis, and so if you want to see how that all breaks down, that's where I'll make that available to you, all right, so that you can get access to it. What I will tell you is that the periods go from the last kingdom that was uprooted, the Ostrogoths in 538 AD, is when they were uprooted, to the point of 1798 is the period of, but I don't want to get that yet because I'm still building the case, okay? So I'm not wanting to reveal those details yet of who it was that did it, although I think most of you will figure it out, right? It's not hard to figure it out. Revelation 13, we'll read, it says they worship the dragon because they gave his authority to the beast. This beast that we see here is the same power as the little horn power in Daniel. So just keep that in mind. They worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast and who is able to wage war with him? And they were given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies and authority to act for 42 months. Now, in Jewish thinking, Jewish months were 30 days. And so 42 times 30, guess what that comes out to? 1,260. All right? And so it's the same time period we're looking. It's the same beast, the same creature, the same, same beast connection to Daniel. He opened his mouth in blasphemies against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And it was also given him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose names has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. And this is why we're talking about this, why we're doing this seminar, is because of the fact that this is going to affect everyone in the world. That's why also the subtitle, one of the subtitles that I use for the seminar is Hope in the Coming Deception, or Hope in the Coming Collapse, but Hope in the Coming Deception is because the world will be deceived by this beast, and all the world will worship him except for the true followers of God. And that deception is still in the future, but I believe it's in the near future. And so it is imperative of us to understand and identify why this beast has this power. And that's what this seminar is all about. As we go through Daniel, we're building a case to help you to be able to identify it so that you can protect yourself and your loved ones from the deception, from the massive, great deception that has been pulled over the wool of everyone, not just of non-Christians, but even over much of the Christian world as well. So what kingdom is represented by the little horn? Well, the little horn must appear after the fourth beast appears, right? The fourth beast is Rome. So we know that the horns represent kings who rule part of the Roman Empire. I don't have the list of them here. Again, I have them in my book, The Last Crisis, all of the kingdoms, but basically Rome broke up into 10 kingdoms, and so we have the 10 toes, right? Or we have the 10 horns, take your pick, and it puts down, the little horn power puts down 3 kingdoms, and then it was little when it began, but it became greater than its fellows, right? And it spoke against the Most High, and it seems to change the times and laws set by God. right? And it was given special powers for 42 months. As I said, this period of 538 to 1798. And so what kingdom is represented by the little horn? Drum roll, please. Yes, thank you. There you go, Noel. All right? The Christian church that rose out of the Roman Empire, right? Christian church, and so it's a Roman Catholic church. For much of the Middle Ages, it was the only Christian church, and unfortunately, over the centuries, it strayed from the Bible and God's law. And the Bishop of Rome, which is otherwise known as the Pope, eventually began to claim to be speaking for God on earth. It is both a religious and a political power. The Pope is both the leader of a religious institution and the head of a nation state. There are only a few people in the world that are like that. The King of England is another one who is both a religious power and a head of state. I once had somebody say, well, why couldn't England be that power? Because, of course, England also comes from one of the tribes of Rome. But the reality is, for more than one reason, they weren't involved in the persecution of the saints for 1,260 years. They don't make claims to be God as the Roman Church does, and they don't have the whole world following them religiously. They do. Certainly the British do have a lot of impact when it comes to politics, but they aren't supreme in that regard. We will see eventually where the second beast is, and it's not the British. And then we see also that the Roman Church is in fact a direct descendant of the Roman Empire. So what does it claim for itself? Well, it claims to be God's representative on earth. They claim to have authority to change God's laws. They claim that they are the final authority on earth and they can change laws, which they have. They have changed laws in the Bible to their whim. We're going to go into some of those changes in a future presentation next weekend. They claim to be the final interpreter of truth on earth. They claim to be the only rightful inheritor of the keys of the kingdom given to the Apostle Peter, to therefore be the only true church on earth. So, do you think they might be guilty of blasphemy? Yeah. So, Revelation 13:6 said he opened his mouth and blasphemies against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. The definition of blasphemy here, I take this one from the the Greek English lexicon says speech that denigrates or defames, reviling, disrespects, slander, and then denigrates. Definition of denigrates is criticize unfairly, revile, criticize in an abusive or angrily insulting manner, or slander, the action or crime of making a false spoken statement damaging to a person's reputation. And you'll also remember the other definition I gave you of blasphemy, which is acting in such a way that other people will then have a wrong view of God because of how you have acted. And if we use that definition, then the Roman Church is absolutely guilty of having turned millions away from God. In fact, a lot of people that claim to not want anything to do with Christianity will often point to the priestly abuses as a reason why they think that the church is full of hypocrites. There's a reason behind that. Claims of past popes. Pius X made this claim. He says, the Pope is not only the representative of Jesus Christ, but he is Jesus Christ himself, hidden under the veil of the flesh. Does the Pope speak? It is Jesus Christ who speaks. Does the Pope accord a favor or pronounce an anathema? It is Jesus Christ who pronounces the anathema or accords the favor. So when the Pope speaks, we have no business to examine. We have only to obey. Is that blasphemy? Yes, it absolutely is blasphemy. Leo the 13th had said, we hold upon this earth the place of God Almighty. And when you go through the history of the popes, there's a lot of really bad things that happen throughout the history of the Roman Church, some really harsh things. So is it a coincidence that priestly abuses have turned so many against God? I would say not. It's a plan of Satan to be able to do so, because then he can use the church to mock God, right? And then the church becomes an instrument to turn people away from the one true God. It has perverted biblical truths that have caused most Protestant churches to accept error. And I will tell you that, we're going to get into some of those errors in the future presentations next weekend, so I hope you'll be with us then. It matters how we worship God, and it matters what truth we believe. We've been establishing that all along, right? It matters what we believe. It matters whether it or not it's in the Bible. It matters whether or not it's what God has asked us to believe. And then we have a choice to make, right? We can do as that new car smell, and go out with our emotions and then use those emotions to then build an argument, or we can go from the Word of God. No matter how difficult or what the choice is, even if it's unpleasant to us in the moment of the changes that we have to make, we're going to make those changes because it's the truth, and we follow the truth wherever it leads, no matter what it costs, right? So we'll dive into those areas, as I said, next weekend. But Revelation 2 says here, 10 to 11, it says, "Do not fear what you're about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to cast some of you into prison, so that you will be tested, and you will have tribulation for 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes will not be hurt by the second death." I do want to just give a caveat here, or a disclaimer. I do believe that there are wonderful, sincere people in the Catholic Church who are serving God to the best of their ability. And I do believe that we serve a merciful and loving God. And so when you come throughout history, I'm not here to tell you that anybody who's been part of the Catholic Church is lost. I'm not going to make any of those kinds of claims, but I will tell you that the day is coming soon where the deceptions that have been set into play will matter. And anybody who is still holding on to those beliefs, those false beliefs, will be deceived. And the whole world is going to follow after it. If we go into Revelation, we will, in a future presentation, you'll see that the whole world is going to be made to wander and worship after that beast. We saw this already in the text, right? The whole world's going to wander after it, and the old world's going to get to the place where they're going to think that they are following God. And I will also just say this, and that is, how can that happen when we have a world right now where mostly we seem to be filled with atheists? And I'll just give you a couple of possible scenarios. I'm not a prophet, so this part of it I'm going to disclaim, but I'll just give you a possible scenario. And one of those is the fact that if you look at the papacy today, the papacy is the number one moral voice in the world, right? The Pope is always weighing in on different choices in the world of what's right and what's wrong. And in a case of a global catastrophe or even a global war where all hell breaks loose, there is going to come a time where people are going to recognize that morality is missing in the world, and they're going to want to bring morality back to the world. And so if you're going to look for one leader who has the most respect and has reached out to all faith groups to build that respect, who would you choose? You would choose the Pope. And so this is one possible scenario where the papacy could end up being given the authority on earth. The other one, and this is, at this point, we don't know, because it's always easier to look back on prophecy than it is to look forward. Okay, so when we look back, we can look and see, oh yeah, this happened, this happened, this happened. But I just say, what if? Is it a coincidence, for instance, that the world has been programmed for the last 50 years on the extraterrestrials? They've been all these movies that have come out, all these TV shows that have come out, and all this programming. If any of you have ever watched Stargate as a TV show, for instance, Stargate, writers have this idea of ancients, and it's a new age idea that mankind can evolve to a higher state of existence. There's these ancients that used to be humans, but they found a way to ascend into a higher plane of existence. That sounds very much like the lie that the devil gave, right? Where he says, you shall not surely die, right? And so human beings who were given that option by an extraterrestrial who happened to show up, right, to be able to show humanity in the midst of its trying hour, in the midst of some kind of massive calamity, how much would you be willing to give that the world would eat out of being like that's hands, right? And not just atheists would believe in him, but Christians would believe in him too, right? And it kind of gives meaning when Jesus says, when you hear he's in the wilderness, don't go, right? And he says, and if it were possible, even the very elect will be deceived. Now, I'm not telling you that's exactly how he's going to do, because he could do it a totally different way. I could also bring you to Maitreya as a figure who Maitreya, I remember being a student in high school listening to a shortwave radio from a program that was coming from England talking about Maitreya. And this was a spirit being who was claiming that he was going to unveil himself to the world, and he was going to simultaneously show up on all the screens of the world. And he was not going to say anything audibly, but in his mind, Everyone's going to hear him in his mind in their own language, and he's going to speak to all the world, and he's going to reproduce the miracle of the Pentecost, right? And so a being like that was to show itself, what were they going to say? According to prophecy, I can guarantee you his spokesperson is going to be the Pope. And it's interesting to me that actually, I believe it's either this Pope, I think it was Benedict before this Pope who had said that if aliens do exist, then he would baptize them. Which is an interesting comment. Why would you even entertain that idea of baptizing aliens, right? But so it's just a kind of an interesting what if. The one thing, though, that I will leave you with is the fact that I guarantee you that this deception is coming. This is why we spend the time and we spend the money to get the word out there and to do our thing. And even though it's a small number, we want to know, let as many people know as possible about this deception, because when it comes, it'll be too late. If you imagine just a scenario where all kinds of war has happened and all hell has broken loose, right? And then this being now shows up to bring healing and to bring peace, and then you and I would come to them and say to people, well, that's actually Satan and he's actually our enemy, right? Do you think the world would listen to us? No, they would tear us limb for limb. They would be convinced that we are the evil ones, right? And by the way, that is the way that the whole world could be sealed very quickly with the mark of the beast, because now what is God becomes seen as the voice of Satan, and what is Satan is actually seen as the voice of God. And so this deception is real and the stakes are high. Literally, we're talking about eternal life, missing out on life forever with God. And so I urge you, each of you, to make a choice, to choose you this day whom you will serve. And I hope and pray that you will choose Jesus, that you'll choose God, and that you'll follow the truth wherever it leads, and that you'll be having the courage to be able to make a decision for the truth. Amen?